Anyway, all right. So this ties directly into what I call the invisible kata. Right. Most people see kata as a series of moves, A to B to C, but that's just the surface. It's the omote, right? It's the outward reflection of the principles and concepts, tactics and strategies in action in real time, right? As a quote unquote form, kata, right? Structure. Um, but again, this is the way we looked at kata way back in the day. That very quickly changed. Um, because again, it's easier for folks to hold on to something that's easy to measure. It's easy to say, oh, yes, that is the right way to do it. Everything else is wrong. It's easier to work on these external physical things so we don't have to feel, we don't have to. Uh, we don't have to battle our own dragons, and we certainly, sure as hell, don't want to do anything that's going to crack the facade or cause it to fall away so that other people see those weaknesses. I mean, that's ego's job, right? To protect us from pain and hardship and reliving things and whatnot, but also, right, to maintain the image, right, of what we want to be known as, right, no matter how fragile that is. But conflict is conflict is conflict. Okay. So what's invisible, when I talk about invisible kata, what's invisible is the lesson hidden underneath that form, right? What I was taught, many things, right? But with reference to kata, um, kata are potentials based on things happening. Because there's lots of lessons. And they're over in the Makimono. They're not in the Densho, right? The Densho were created from that other stuff. They're reflections of the strategies, tactics, perspectives, philosophy, ideology, and all that of any given lineage. Right? Um, so they're potentials in any given moment. Right? This is how the basics, the foundational things, both physical, right? Kamae, movement, whatever, right? And perspective, strategy, control, all that kind of stuff, right? Could play out. But one of the things that was really pressed in was that at its core, every kata is teaching you how to make sense out of the chaos. Because warfare is pretty fucking chaotic. Okay. It's not like I think most people still envision shit because of, camera angles and war movies and all that kind of stuff, right? But still, much like our the battles of our American Revolution, right, and similar things, right, in other areas, and then those things even got carried into the Civil War. I mean, shit, less than 100 years later, right, after doing guerrilla tactics and shit like that, right. Everything went back to lining up across from each other and throwing fucking volleys of bullets and cannonballs and shit at stationary targets. Okay, so much for lessons learned. Um, but I think that's how people think about things, right? Um, but it's chaos. Even if it does start that way, holy shit, right? People running for cover, people that have a body part blown off or a hole in them or whatever, and they're not dead. They're screaming their ass off, right? They're screaming in pain. They're screaming, "Help me!" And they're your friend. Anyway, I'm going to get off that topic. So, um, without this understanding, right? Without the makimono, the scrolls of principles, strategies, concepts, right? The Densho techniques look no different from karate or any other fight school. I know that in appearance it looks different, but in essence, just moves, just kata. This is what people tend to light on. And this is a beginner mindset, right? Oh, well, this style, because it looks different from that style, right? Okay, that's how you tell the difference between the two. That's karate. And yeah, well, 100 years or more ago, right? What we're practicing in the Bujinkan was called karate because that was the trendy term of the time. Another point in history, it was called jujitsu. Another point in time, it was called something else. Right? Because they were just the terms that people used. Right? The term ninja is rather new. Right? Just people that were this target that we're aiming for, right? Shinobi no mono. But they were also called kusha. They were called kage. They were kan. Right? All kinds of different names. Right? Because those names pointed to some aspect of them or whatever, right? But again, this is I'm only speaking from my study, my experience, things I got from my teachers and whatnot. I compared to the master teachers in the new Japanese soke, I'm still a baby at this, right? I've only been doing this for what 44, 45 years, but that's what I've come up with, right? Without this understanding, right? Kata teaching you how to make sense out of chaos, right? There's invisible lessons in there, right? Without the makimono, the Densho techniques, again, I understand that the movement's different and it looks different and all that kind of stuff, but they're no different in essence from any other martial art that has kata, any other fight school. Okay? The invisible kata is what prepares you to deal with the things you can't see until they happen, right? The unseen timing, like the sudden shift in timing this person uses, the unknown terrain, right? The insistence of 100% training in a sanitized dojo. What I mean by that is flat floors, no obstacles, whatever, right? And again, there's times for that kind of training. But we don't know what the terrain's going to be like, what the environment's going to be like. Okay. And that's not even addressing the unexpected emotions that are going to pop up: fear, anger, hesitation, yours and his. Okay. Nagata Sensei once said, "You must live budo in your daily life, or it is just a performance. It's just an act." Okay. That's the invisible kata. It's not performance. It's the daily life training. Okay. One of my teachers used a example, right? And some of you guys have heard me use the same one. I'm just borrowing from this example that he used. If you've, in high school or if you went to university or whatever, if you ever went through a class, usually they're science classes, where you had classroom study and then you had a lab, right? Where you'd learn about something, then you go to the lab, and let's say it was biology, right? You learn, I don't know, the physiology of an earthworm, right? 7 brains, but they're 7 nodules that make up this brain thing, right? The shit I remember. Anyway, right? And so you learn about these things, and then the lab, then you're going to dissect an earthworm so you can actually physically see this stuff, not in a drawing, whatever, right? And understand, the actual depth of the meat of the animal, and that kind of thing. Because if you cut too deep, well, then you cut the friggin' spinal cord. If you don't cut deep enough, well, you're not going anywhere, right? or it could be a frog or whatever, right? It's chemistry class. You learn about these interactions, alkalis and acids and things like that. And then you go to the lab and you mix shit together. And it's supposed to turn a certain color, or you mix these things together and you dip a litmus paper into it and it's supposed to turn a certain color, whatever. It does, it doesn't, whatever. But it's this back and forth between them. Okay. And that just kind of reminds me something I didn't put in my notes originally, but I just it popped in my head, and I'll talk about this in a minute. It's people's concept of what a dojo is. Okay? But uh, what I was taught was in that context, the dojo, whatever it is, I don't give a shit if it's your backyard or it's a physical place like I have or whatever. The dojo is the classroom. Life outside, okay? That's the lab. That's where we're supposed to be trying out the lessons. See, pretty fucking difficult in 21st century to be trying out the physical fight lessons without risking going to jail or causing problems for your family or whatever, right? But what about all the other things? Fudoshin, Zanshin, Heijoshin, all these things. What? Well over half the stuff that I have in the Seishin Teki Kyoyo book. Yeah. So, um, again, it's the daily life training, right? It's practicing and honing our skills for what to do when things go wrong, when life throws curveballs, when chaos hits, and you still keep moving, right? I get it. Sometimes, like, it's shock to the system. Happens to me, right? Take some time. Let that uh, chemical, electrical kind of uh, reaction, right, to the fight, flight, or freeze mechanism kicking in, right? I mean, we don't want that to go away, right? The amygdala sends a message to the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus dumps a bunch of shit into your system, right? Shocks the cells awake. You transform, right? Um, you got to let that pass, and then clarity returns, and then you assess the situation and create a goddamn battle plan, and you keep moving, right? Because that's what warriors do. At least that's what I was taught that warriors do, and it's worked for me so far. So here we are, right? Um, but again, just in case people need the credibility from the other teachers, because I'm just a, you know, Occidental trying to learn this Japanese thing, right? I got the sensei, you must live budo in your daily life, or it's just performance. But then Hatsumi Sensei said similar things. Manaka Sensei said similar things. Tanamura, uh, Sano Sensei, all these guys, right? They've just said it a little bit differently. Right? Way too many people. As a matter of fact, my first interaction with Shirei Sensei, where I went to a seminar he wasn't supposed to be teaching. That's a whole other story. Anyway, he was talking about this very thing, but the words he used was talking about how many people in the art had big kotsu bones, right? The word kotsu means bones, right? But the sternum is also called kotsu. But the word for ego, or one of the words for ego, is also kotsu. So the sternum in Japanese is very often called the kotsu bone, right? Which sounds like a play on words because it's already kotsu, but it's the big ego bone because the bigger the ego, the more that stands out, the more it puffs out, right? I've gone into combat with people like that. They ran around during training episode or training. I hated fucking field training and stuff when I was in the army, right? I learned my lessons and stuff, and I endured the hardship, but I didn't sign up to be a grunt. So no offense to the grunts, right? We need you guys, um, by all means, right? But that's not what I signed up for. Didn't like the field duty. I went and did it, right? all these motherfuckers that supposedly liked field duty and stuff running around. Back in the day, there was the gonna kill a commie for mommy and all that kind of shit, right? Yeah. Well, next thing you know, we're on a C-130 heading for a tiny island down near Cuba called Grenada, and these are the guys that are praying and crying because it's all great, right? As long as the shit's not really happening. So, anyway, almost forgot. I was going to mention something about dojo. Again, how we define things puts us on a certain path. Okay. Most people, uh, and we even have this in our curriculum, right? So for new people, right, that when they have their vocabulary, right, the translation we give them for dojo is a training hall, which is a conventional translation or meaning used in conventional martial arts in Japan today. Okay. It's a hall. It's a whatever, right? But hall is a kan. So that doesn't make sense. But if you look at the kanji used to write the word dojo, right? Um, what it means at its core is a place where enlightenment takes place. Could it be a hall? Yeah. Could also be your backyard. Could also be your office. Could be wherever you're working on these skills, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, whatever, right? The place where you're working to develop yourself, right, is a dojo. And it should be treated like one. Okay? One of the things that's helpful for people in the beginning is to have a dojo to go to, which is why I put a lot of effort into making mine look, smell, sound, right? Sometimes we play music. There's always a certain blend, or there's a couple of blends that we rotate through of incense, um, the artwork and stuff like that on the walls and whatnot, because um, I need to wake up the minds of the students when they come in. Again, another lesson I was taught by Hatsumi Sensei, Hayes, a bunch of these people, right? That it wakes them up out of their, the words that were used for me were dull sleepwalk living, right? It's not like any other place in their life. That's why we don't burn incense that people can get readily or have probably, use, or we don't burn incense that is sweet, or right, remind them of certain things, right, like cedar and those kind of things, right? Because it needs to wake up the mind. Um, it needs to do what it needs to do, right? But ultimately, any place, right? In Mikyo, we would say that dojo space, we're at the center of it. It's the mandala. We're at the center of it, and the mandala extends as far as we can see in all directions. And the thing is that when we move, we're still at the center of the mandala. What changed was what the edges look like. But we're always at the center of the mandala, and the mandala always extends to the horizon in all directions, and it's sacred space. Nothing in that space doesn't matter, doesn't not matter.